So without further ado, I'd like to go ahead and get the session started. Thanks again for inputting your name and organization in the chat box. Bio El Paso Juarez is thankful for the positive and supportive relationship we have with the City of El Paso and its economic development team since our inception in 2018. Those of us who have been following economic development activities closely have known that the city has been working on updating their economic development incentives, particularly the 380 agreement. Those updates were finalized and approved by City Council in January of this year. Rafa, please correct me if I'm wrong. I'm sure you will during your presentation, but we thought it would be great to have the city's economic development team join us to present what those changes look like and give us more insight into how those changes apply and impact the medical device manufacturing industry, which is what us here at Bio EPJ are laser focused on. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our guest speaker. As the Business Services Coordinator for the City of El Paso's Economic Development Department, Rafael Arellano oversees the department's redevelopment incentives programs and current development projects across the El Paso area. He also guides and tracks economic development efforts related to the downtown area and implements business retention and expansion and communication outreach efforts with key community stakeholders and partner organizations. Mr. Arellano additionally serves as a liaison on various City 380 incentive projects to help recruit and retain regional private investment. Rafael holds a bachelor's and master's of public administration degree in urban and regional planning from the University of Texas at El Paso and is a nationally certified new urbanist and a member of the Texas Economic Development Council. In his personal life, Mr. Arellano composes and records music with within various genres. So I'll go ahead and turn the floor over to you, Rafa. Thank you again for being here with us today. And if you haven't been able to put your name and organization in the chat box, please feel free to do that whenever you get a chance. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Jackie. And, you know, a genuine thank you to everyone who set this up, all the hosts, obviously, by UPJ, Jackie and Christian, and a genuine thank you to everyone who's here. You know, I know generically we say that when we open, but this is truly an opportunity for us. And basically because as an economic development department, we understand that what we do is really just sort of establishing the tools, right? Creating things that can eventually be used by people who are smarter than we are, especially within their respective industries, to make sure that they can push that forward. And so the sort of next steps in terms of our policy will be moments like these, meeting with individuals who are, as I mentioned, involved specifically with our target industries. And you all are really the ones who are going to guide us in terms of what these specific targets should be, how we can serve to, say, increase the supply chain, or I should say enhance the supply chain, and all kinds of things like these. So I'm really genuinely happy for the opportunity to speak with you all. And I should mention that, you know, if there's anything in more detail that we can't cover today, either during the presentation or question session, please contact us individually. The department will be more than happy to speak with you know, anyone who thinks they have some info to share with us. So thank you. I did want to start with that. And Jackie, you were right. You were 100% correct. It was January that the policy was updated of this year. And when we did that, there were 4 portions that we targeted for adjustments. And I'm not going to read the blue text. I'll go into detail a bit further down the presentation. So here I'm just going to sort of let you know kind of the overall view is that there were 4 goals that thankfully were approved by council in terms of amendments. And so the first one was to adjust the wage requirements. And again, I'll specify what that means in a bit. B was to allow for supply chain directed incentives. C, increase local workforce skills. And then D, update the target areas. And so I think, you know, probably most effective today is I just want to make sure that the community, especially the ones logged on, understand what our strategic 380 incentive policy is, sort of how it functions, the mechanics. And then I think if we can put that on the table and put that for you all to use, then you can probably tell us again what the probably greatest use and application of this should be. And so, Jackie, again, you were correct. The new policy was adopted January 19th, 2021. This was by unanimous council approval. And this updated a policy that had been previously adopted November 3rd of 2015. And so anytime we open up with policies, you know, we've got 3 different incentive policies with the city. The one that we use to pull in industries and get jobs, increase wages, and all that good stuff is what we call a strategic 380 policy. And this is really the principal tool that we use. And so, as with any policy, you want to revisit these, what they're doing. You want to revisit the policies and make sure you update the policies to account for, new conditions, be they, economic, social, or whatever they are. And so that's what you see that we did. And we hope that what we did is, and we, use this every day, 24/7. And we are confident that this will help strengthen the policy, but obviously we hope that what we did can actually be utilized by individuals like yourselves in specific industries. And so with this slide, it's just to give you an idea that we always start with a city vision. In this case, it's El Paso will have safe and beautiful neighborhoods, a vibrant regional economy, and exceptional recreational, cultural, and educational opportunities. And then we develop policy goals that hopefully try to push forward the vision, which eventually get us down to key criteria. And I should mention we have some more partners on the line, and like the Borderplex Alliance, for example, was key in guiding a lot of this too, as was obviously the MCA. So we were able to develop key criteria, and that's to focus on quality jobs, on bringing in business types, certain business types, things that have a large capital investment, and then targeted incentives for different areas. Overall, what that helps us do is establish a city strategic plan. And again, we mean to increase the wages. We want to enhance veteran employment. And also, and this is, by the way, I bolded things that I think are most pertinent to today's presentation. We want to partner with higher education institutions to make sure that we're consistently educating our El Pasoans to increase the value of our human capital. And what you see on the left side are our target industries right now. And again, the bolded one is life sciences. And that's really related to what we're doing today, this morning. And then we also have targeted incentives for specific areas. And again, most relevant for today is the MCA. We also want to partner with educational institutions I mentioned, and then also enhance research and development. And so this is just a slide kind of emphasizing what we were looking for. And it's interesting because the sort of magic of incentive policies is that you have to balance what your ideals are, your ultimate goals are, with what is applicable, right? So we'd all love to say, hey, companies, you have to pay $100 an hour for every job, but that's just not doable. It's obviously an exaggerated example, but so the sort of magic of these things is you have to make sure that what you're putting down on paper as incentives are attainable for the companies. And I think we've done well so far. And you'll see what those numbers look like, but I know that the policy that we recently pushed forward, it really expands on that. So, by the way, you all can see my screen, right? Everything's clear?
Yes, we see everything.
Okay, good. Okay. And again, just as Jackie mentioned, I'm sorry, my camera's off, but it's only for the sake of making sure that our presentation doesn't get slowed down in any way. So again, I want to provide a background on how our policy works. There are a whole set of steps that we take when we're evaluating if we should work with a company to bring them into town. And this is just sort of a quick slide to give you a sense of all the different sort of steps that we take in bringing in companies. A lot of times it starts with requests for proposals directly from the state, and that's via our partners at the Borderplex. Sometimes these are also direct contacts. And so this could be us reaching out to a company reaching out to us individually, or site consultants reaching out to us. And then what we do is we make sure that when we're talking to companies, we understand their sort of intentions, their capacity and potential, and then try to tie that in with how we're going to craft the individual incentives to support that company. And so I think most important, I'm not necessarily going to go through each step here, but it's important to see that this can, take 1 or 2 years. Sometimes it goes as quickly as a few months. And that really depends on the respective, the company's schedule. But a lot of times it takes a few years to make sure we get the right companies and we're able to put together the correct incentive for them. But ultimately, we do bring that to our council for review, and that's typically at about stage 5 or 6. And then we do what is basically compliance after in stage 7. And that's probably the most important part because, I mentioned this can be 1 or 2 years that we're sort of vetting and creating the incentive policies. But when we sign contracts, these can stretch out for 5, 10, 15, or even 20 years. And what we realized is that it's that stage 7, that sort of compliance portion where we keep contact with a company for 5, 10, 15 years that can really help us when we're going back and trying to update our policies and sort of applying that feedback loop to understand what we have to do. And so just keep in mind that a lot of what you saw today isn't really just random, right? These are our lessons that we have as a department have learned. feedback we've received from either other institutions or partners, private sector, public sector, but also the companies that we work with. And so I guess key takeaway here is just to make sure that you understand that what you see today before you as what were adopted for amendments are really a reflection of what the companies have been saying that they needed to do or needed to see. And so this slide is meant to be fully transparent in terms of what we typically use, right, as tools. I know a lot of times when people hear about incentives, the natural question is, well, what are these incentives exactly? How do you incentivize companies to come to town? And what you see in front of you is actually the tools that we have. And we've purposely sort of created a count of how often we've used these tools. Principal amongst these are city sales and use tax rebates, permit fee rebates, property tax rebates. But also there is a training grant component that really wasn't sort of, it was in the policy, but really wasn't one of the main ones that was being promoted. But we realized that sort of the really key to bringing companies and keeping them in the long run was how we educated our local population, right? And that really is a driver. Incentives can work greatly to pull in companies, but when you're talking about, your incentive ends in year 10, are they going to say 11, 12, year 13? That a lot of that deals with a bunch of other conditions. Some of those I'll mention in a bit, but training is so important, right? But just to go back a bit, the way our incentives function is basically that so you can imagine there is a piece of property that's generating about, just for example, it's like $1,000 in taxes. What we do is we try to tie companies in with specific areas or specific properties, and then when they invest, naturally the taxes go up, right? So let's say you've got $1,000 in taxes that are being collected on a property. When a company comes in, let's say it'll go up to 2,000. Obviously, it's really small numbers, but it's that $1,000 in additional tax value that goes on the table then for rebates. And obviously the real numbers are a lot bigger than that. And so we use a lot of rebates, not only, incremental property tax rebates, but also the city sales and use tax rebates and permit fee rebates to try to make sure that companies basically see El Paso as a preferred spot when they're looking nationally and really internationally and trying to decide where they're going to locate. But keep your eye on that right bar, that orange bar, because that training grant is something that's going to come up in a bit. And again, as I mentioned, that's not something that was heavy in the policy, but we did want to create an additional emphasis for that. This slide is then meant to show you sort of the success that we've had in bringing in different types of companies. So what you see in this list are companies that are target industries, but also a few other types of companies that we also brought in, because we never want to limit ourselves to simply what's on paper in terms of target industries. And so you can see that we've had a lot of success with certain companies, bringing in companies within certain industries, but other ones not so much. And what's obviously glaring there is the defense and aerospace. And life sciences and healthcare obviously could do a bit more. But what we notice there is companies that are involved, say, for example, in defense and aerospace, are heavy on supply chain, right? How close are they to their buyers and suppliers? And so we understood that this is something we really had to go back and address when we were talking about amendments. And so that, again, will come up. So again, this is just a slide to give you a sense of how many companies within each of these target areas we've been able to bring in the past 5 years. And here is a snapshot of all the different types of programs that we try to use. Obviously, there are local programs, and I'm mentioning our Chapter 380, but you should know that the county also has a similar policy, and that's Chapter 381. And Chapter 380 is just really literally the chapter in the Texas tax code that allows us to extend these kinds of incentives. So if you were to pull out that big book, you go to Chapter 380, and that describes this program. And so 381, the very next chapter, describes the county's programs and so on. But we do have a set of local programs that we're always trying to sort of cobble together and make sure we provide the best package for, whatever the company needs to see. But then obviously we do tie into state programs as well, and then federal programs. And so again, the takeaway from this one is to give you a sense that we're always reaching across our boundaries to make sure that we can put together an incentive package that really is tailored specifically for each company and their need. And this is important because competition is intense and increasing. And so, El Paso really does have limited economic development fund sources, but we do compete against communities with significant economic development resources. And we put one example down. And so as you can see, since 1989, 586 Texas cities have levied an economic development sales tax. And that is basically a sales tax that is applied, and every penny that is sourced from that gets dropped into a fund that does nothing but support economic development for whatever jurisdiction that's in. That is huge. El Paso doesn't really have that. The closest thing we have is our impact fund, and we're very grateful for that. But those numbers are not really sort of up at the level that these specifically targeted sales taxes can generate. And so we popped in an example at the bottom just to give you a sense of just one town and how that affects theirs and how we have to compete. So Frisco, Texas, as you can see on the bottom, that's a current population of 205,000. So that's about a third the size of El Paso in terms of population as far as the actual city limits. But from the beginning of 2015 through the end of 2019, Frisco's Economic Development Corporation received a combined $202 million in sales tax revenue. So that's over $40 million annually. And that's an average of $983 per person. And as I mentioned, we have a comparable fund, but ours, to give you an idea, I think this year we were able to pull in about $3.7 million. So you can imagine the difference between 3.7 and 40 million is extreme. And that is a town that is a third the size of El Paso. And so then you expand on that example and you can figure, we compete within Texas, but we also compete nationally and even internationally. And so it's important to understand that when we're creating, again, these policies, we always have to account for these kind of competitors. And we always have to make sure that even though we do have high ideals, that we're able to then sort of craft a policy that incorporates as many of those ideals as possible, it also becomes competitive, right? And that we can actually implement versus, just having a good-looking policy that stays on a shelf and never really gets used. So this is just to give you a sense of the kind of factors that we always have to deal with. But, in spite of this, we thankfully, again, thanks to our partners, thanks to our staff, and really thanks to our community, have been able to get some wins. And so this is really what this is, I call the money slide, right? All that stuff that I was talking about before, it barely means anything if we can't come to you all and show you what the final outputs or outcomes of this policy are. And we're thankful that, again, we've been able to work closely with our partners and with companies to help generate almost 13,800 jobs in the past 5 years. And these have been directly supported. And so over 5,200 jobs have been created, nearly 8,600 jobs have been retained. And that is a 79% increase over the previous 5 years. And against that last bullet point is evidence of the importance of revisiting your policies and making sure that you keep up with the times and then you increase the efficiency of your policy. And thankfully, we've been able to do that. So again, 13,000 jobs, and obviously we'd like to have a bunch more. But those 13,000 jobs are key not only for our community, but especially to the people who can now, 13,000 people who can now feed their families, support their families with what we've been able to help bring in. And so I should emphasize, we never say that we brought them in. All we can do is help support institutions like yourselves, companies, to make sure that you all can help bring in and retain these jobs. So that's on the job side. On the right side of the screen, what you see is the amount of capital investment that we've been able to bring in. And that is, again, in the past 5 years, nearly $1.7 billion in actual capital investment. That is a 25% increase over agreement obligation. And that's an important bullet point, because what we always do in economic development is we try to make sure we underpromise and overdeliver. And so what that means is that we work to craft contracts that, generate a certain amount of capital investment or jobs, but we know that we're bringing companies that can exceed what we're even promoting in our council. And that's what that bullet point tells you, that we've been able to target those correctly and actually are getting more from the contracts than what was initially estimated. And again, the bottom bullet point is sort of related to the last bullet point on jobs, and that this is a 66% increase over the previous 5 years. So again, we've had a lot of success thanks to our partners in our community with jobs, with capital investment, but then also with increasing the average wages. And so this isn't average wages, this is median county wage. And again, this is literally the middle wage. If you were to put all the wages in the county in a line, this is the wages in the middle, that's the median, obviously. But still, what we've been able to do with the policy from 2013 to 2019, here it's a bit of a different time period, but it still stands, the point stands that, EP, MSA median county wages for the county has grown by 13% in the previous 6 years. And so that went from $12.38 in 2013 to $14 in 2019, and kind of keep that $14 figure in your mind as I go a bit further in the presentation. But again, what we've been able to do with the policy is not only bring in new investment, not only bring in new jobs, make sure that those jobs are helping to increase the median county wage, or I should say move that number to the right on that line. So we've also had success on this level, and so far the policy is working. And you know, sometimes what happens is a lot of people, you know, they may not understand how these incentives are structured. And so again, that's why I'm really thankful that we're able to get out to the public in moments like this morning and kind of specify how these things work, because, you know, this is even our representatives at their community meetings get these questions. And so the sort of misunderstanding is that people say, gosh, every time the city signs one of these economic development incentive agreements, they're pulling money from the general fund, giving it to corporations. And that's at the expense of our city funds, right? So here goes money for our streets, for our parks, and our services. And the truth is that that's really not the case. So the question is, where does the funding for incentives come from? And the answer is that the majority of incentive funds come from the projects themselves. And in a very real sense, that's sort of due to the structure that I had mentioned before, right? Where we keep the base, that is the current tax revenue associated with the properties that we're trying to incentivize development on. And it's only the brand new tax revenue that, again, goes on the table for rebates, and even then at a reduced scale across the year. So it's always with an eye to increase the revenue coming into the city, right? So over 96% of all incentive funds are sourced from the new revenue created by the very same 380s that are being signed. And so you can just the same say that without 380s, we would not have the 63 million in additional revenue. And that pie chart on the right side shows you what that visually looks like. So there you see the majority of that payment, all the area in blue, is money being pulled from the companies and then just being rebated to the companies. And that little orange slice right there is basically what we get off of our impact fund. But what's really great about this is that this is sort of net amount during the incentives. But once you know, I mentioned, let's say it's a 10-year incentive. Once you get to year 11, everything goes back to the county, to the city, to the school district. So it's all 100% brand new tax revenue. And that's very interesting, because we realize that obviously when the tax incentives end, you know, the company starts wondering, well, what's next? Are we going to stay here? What other factors are holding us down in El Paso, or keeping us here? And partially what we did in terms of the recent amendment is we try to make sure that we bolster the other portions to make sure that when the incentives end, the companies still want to stay in El Paso, and that the conditions are here so that they consider themselves, you know, more profitable if they stay in our area. But this slide is just to give you an idea that the incentives that we're activating are not pulling money from the general fund. In fact, what they're doing is quite the reverse. They're actually adding revenue for our city services. Here, what we did is we listed just 8 really of some of the more recent incentive agreements that we've been able to activate to pull in, either enhance local businesses, expand them on the left side, or attract new businesses. And I should mention, we've got, gosh, I think it's about 102, 103 incentive agreements. So we've got a lot more than this. So this represents maybe, you know, 7% of what we've got, but again, it's a good snapshot to give you a sense of the kind of things that we look for. And so you see in the bullet points, these are significant job creators. These are significant investments. And then we've added sort of additional things at the bottom, the third bullet points. But again, the overall takeaway from this slide should be that when we activate our incentives, they are not only meant to bring new companies in, but also really meant, and in fact, I you know, speak frankly, we also want to serve more to enhance local businesses, because we know there's a lot of businesses in town that also need support. And we understand as an organization, the majority of new jobs, you know, in any jurisdiction are created by the companies already in town. And so I do want to express to the attendees today that we know that if you are a company that's already doing business in El Paso, we definitely welcome you to reach out to us. And if there's any sort of expansion that you're considering, reach out to us, because our eyes are wide open and our ears are wide open to help support the local businesses, but also obviously to attract new businesses in town. And I also wanted to throw in a slide to give you a sense of the other sort of ways that our incentives work. So as I mentioned, we've got policies that help target the expansion of industries, bringing in new jobs, specific to target industries, but we can also do what we can also do with these policies is physically rebuild our city. And I know these don't fully seem, 100% relevant to today's presentation, but I'll kind of tie it in at the end to give you a sense of how it does tie in. But for now, what you can see is that all these buildings, obviously the West Star Tower, the Plaza Hotel, the Camino Real, and which is the Sand Street Boutique Hotel on the top right side, these were all buildings that obviously the West Star didn't exist before, but a lot of these other ones were really in need of sort of love, right, and rehabilitation. And we were able to structure incentive agreements to bring those back and to help support the rehabilitation of those buildings. And so for example, the top right one, the Sand Street Boutique Hotel, that's right downtown on Sand Street. If you're at all familiar with that, that was really a empty building. And it was very worn down. And the incentive that we were able to structure was helping support, it has been helpful in helping transform that building into really what is one of the nicer facilities in our city now. And so we can do that. We can help rebuild the areas that we need to rebuild. And that's very relevant to the area that's around the MCA's campus, right? Because we're also working on sort of enhancing the built environment to create more density, more attraction. But I'll come back to that in just a bit. But what we can also do, the last thing I want to say on the slide is we can bring in certain companies that, may not be able to say, commit to a whole bunch of jobs. But they do have something special that we see. So those three individuals that you see there are the co-founders of a company called Curacubbie. That is a company that we worked with the Vortiplex to help bring from the Silicon Valley area. They were considering a couple of areas. We were able to bring them out here. And basically what they did is they really created their own software. They coded from the bottom up, proprietary software that helps them process financial transactions on the internet at a cost of 0 pennies. And if you know anything about that area, that's really not doable yet. And so a lot of the larger companies, the PayPals of the world, are watching them closely and trying to understand what they can do and how they were able to do it. So this is a company that, truthfully wasn't able to because of the nature of tech startups, wasn't able to commit to, 1,000 new jobs right away. But we knew that they had such a unique product that if we could work to bring them to El Paso, okay, and then work to help establish training programs that would then teach El Pasoans how to use their unique software and then add that skill set to our community, then we knew that was going to be a big win for us. And so just keep this in mind as we're talking about maybe research companies that you all would consider or might think that are probably something we should consider. And just know that even if it's a company that can't bring too many jobs, if they have something that's very unique, in terms of skills or information, we definitely look to that as a positive. And so I just wanted to make sure that the attendees understood that these aren't just meant to say, you've got to bring this many jobs, which is important, this much capital investment, but also if you have something unique, we will work for you or we'll work with you to make sure that you come to El Paso and make this your home. This slide is to give you a sense of the citywide impact. The little blue notches are all areas that we've helped companies locate to, right? And each one of these areas, it means new emphasis for that area, new investment, new jobs, new density, hopefully. And the important part to notice here is that the wealth is spread across the community geographically, right? So it's all over the city. Naturally, there is a slight cluster in our central business district, our downtown area, but that's not unique to El Paso. That happens typically. But what's important to note is that you can see that we've tried to bring companies and help locate them all over the city. And so again, it's sort of the importance of being able to distribute these facilities across the city is well understood by us, because obviously some people can't everyone can't drive to the same place in town for these jobs. So again, the important part of this slide is to understand that as we work to bring companies in and new investment and new jobs, we also work to help spread these out across the city to make them accessible to different populations, which may not be able to transport themselves across the city as easily as others may. So that is the geographic distribution, right? But then this also tells you, this slide is meant to show you how the funding, that tax revenue that I had mentioned, is distributed. So El Paso, as a city, typically foots the bill for these incentives. Chapter 380 incentives commit the city's portion of taxes But when we do that, all that new tax revenue is distributed across all the various taxing entities. So as you can see, for every new dollar we bring in, the school district gets 43% of that. The city gets 29%. That's where the funding for these incentives typically is sourced from. The county gets 50%, and thankfully the county's been a much stronger partner recently, and so they've been right with us as we're incentivizing companies. So it's usually the case now that with a 380 comes a chapter 381. That's the county's portion, but then also the UMC or more medical facilities get 8% of every new dollar, and then the EPCC gets 5%, and so it's important to understand that, again, when we're activating these incentive agreements, it's not at the expense of our schools, our hospitals, and our colleges. In fact, it's quite the reverse, the opposite, I should say, that every time the city helps structure these, we generate brand new tax revenue at the percentages that you see at the bottom. So that is the percentage. Here you see what those numbers actually look like. And so this is now the tax benefits that were created for our community. And again, as you can see, the time period is slightly different. Most of these slides that I've shown you are 2015 to 2019. This is 2002 through 2019. But ultimately, the point stand, and honestly, the majority of this funding has come in the recent 5 years anyway. So here you can see that with these incentives, we've been able to help support the increase in tax revenue to the county at the tune of almost $60 million. Our school districts, 157 million, EPCC, as you can see, 17 million, UMC, 32 million, and the DMD, which is kind of a special district more for downtown, the downtown management district, has also received over $1 million. So that's a total new tax input, thanks to these incentives, of over $268 million in the past 12 years. And so I guess the important thing here is to understand that we, again, as I mentioned before, as a organization, always work to structure incentives that are a win-win. The companies do win, but that also will be a win for El Paso in sort of the raw sense here that you can see the dollars, but again, in a manner that will also bring more education, more information to our city. So this is really important, right? And so far what you've seen is the process, the background, the philosophy of our policy. But now what I want to show you is what we promoted as updated adjustments to our policy. And again, this was adopted in mid-January, so we're still now at the implementation process. But here I will read a bit more detail. So goal A means to shift the wage considerations to require that all proposed positions, this is what the companies are proposing to bring, exceed the local wages associated with each proposed position as per the Bureau of Labor Statistics. And I'll break each one of these down in more detail in just a bit. B is that we want to facilitate partnership incentives with supply chain, especially gap fillers, the company. So we create a sort of more holistic supply chain and a business community that actually becomes an attractive component in and of itself. Goal C, we want to target incentives for skills training. And goal D, we want to update the target areas. So I'll jump in really quickly to what the first adopted amendment was. And so again, this first one was that we will require that all proposed positions must exceed the local wages associated with each proposed position as per the BLS. And so as I mentioned earlier, the previous policy was really focused on the median county wage. Okay, so that is a number that moves every year. The latest we've had is $14 per hour, and that's a good number. But truthfully, it's somewhat of an abstract number because it doesn't really account for the various wages within each skill level, right? So we found ourselves, and this is more than once, in situations where we haven't asked companies that were proposing to bring jobs that, we're providing wages that were superior to the wages that were supplied locally to those jobs, but we were having to say, no, that's not working for us because, you have to pay a $10 an hour job, $14 per hour. And that was not working. So we had to consistently keep going to our council and try to ask them to go sort of beyond the policy and value each of these, for all the other reasons that we knew they should be coming to El Paso. And so we knew that right away we had to switch from that because this, again, is in the spirit of making sure that these are attainable incentives Again, you don't want to just shoot so high that these become non-attainable, and then you only, you've now increased your cover charge to $100 per person. You've got one person at the party. So we want to make sure that even though we did want to increase what we were asking, we also did so in a way that was making sure that we still got plenty of people inside. And so the idea here was that we can increase the value of each skill level. If we were able to increase the value of each skill level, this would increase the overall median county wage. And we know that skill-specific approach will shift the median county wage needle up, or I should say to the right, while allowing for market competitiveness. So the bottom is a real life example. This is a company that was recently brought to El Paso. We recently were able to bring. So this is a company that was proposing to bring a number of jobs. The example you see is basically the jobs are called kind of pickers and packers. These are fulfillment center workers. Those jobs in El Paso right now pay an average hourly wage of $10.17. This company was coming in and proposing to pay $12.50 for that same position. So we obviously said, hey, look, this is a wage that is 18% superior to what is currently paid for that job in El Paso. But because of the way the policy was structured with the $14 an hour median county wage requirement, we had to say that these were not quality jobs, even though we knew that if we were able to bring this in, it would work to increase the wages, right? And so that's the first sort of adopted adjustment. We said, look, let us then now gauge the value of each job as it compares to its specific skill level. And if these jobs can commit to paying more than what those types of jobs pay in El Paso, we want to classify that as a quality job to be able to move forward and begin the discussions of incentives of the company. We know that doing this will help us not only be more competitive, but then also actually bring in more companies and increase the overall wages at a faster pace. And at the bottom, the final little table there is just simple math. It's just to give you a sense that if we were able to do, say an 18% increase for every job level, we would quickly move up to $16.52 per hour in terms of the median county wage. So the first one, again, is to get away from a more abstract and generic median county wage figure, and then actually specify, get more specific in terms of what the wages that we are going to require for each skill level is. And this, by the way, is much more workable for companies. So it makes us more competitive in terms of the actual market, but then it also helps, like I mentioned, increase our wages at a higher pace. So this is really big. The second one is basically a cluster strategy. This is something that wasn't in the policy at all before. But basically, when you're talking to companies, there are a number of factors that help motivate them in terms of where they're going to eventually settle. And, three of the top ones are, one, how are your government relations, right? The taxes. And thankfully, that's exactly what our 380 policy is meant to address. So we work with companies to make sure that the tax situation is favorable, and that pulls them in. Secondly, they always ask about the workforce. What kind of workforce, what capacity you have, how competitive are your wages? And that's really one of our strengths in El Paso. That's kind of the overall blessing, right, that we can always use to help bring companies in. Very important. But the third one, this is one of those, as I mentioned, is one that's probably more important even after the incentives turn out. And that is, how close am I as a company to my buyers and my suppliers, right? And that is huge, because that really affects your ability to be more efficient with your company and to really reduce costs in other areas. And so what we're seeing with this amendment that was adopted is we now want to reemphasize the value of sort of creating a really strong supply chain. And the intent now is really a cluster strategy. We want to cluster more buyers and suppliers, more downstream and upstream companies closer to each other, because we know that this in and of itself becomes the main attraction for companies, right? And the overall intent here is that if we can do this part right, we won't have to put out a single penny to bring in the larger sort of target industries that you saw earlier. The idea is, if we can build the environment on the ground, that is, we can make the fertile soils, right, get the soils fertile, those target companies will come to us. They will see that it's beneficial for them to be here because, gosh, all their suppliers and buyers are already here. Then when they knock on our door, these sort of leverage changes, and then we can get better deals for El Paso. So this, again, is meant to support companies. And so all we're saying here is that if we can identify you as a company that is bringing in and supporting a supply chain component, especially if it's a gap that we're missing, we want to start qualifying you just on those terms, because we know, for example, that sometimes these companies are, say, manufacturing companies. Manufacturing companies may not be able to pay the highest wages, but the advantage of bringing in those companies are, again, that you enhance and really strengthen your supply chain, which eventually leads to bringing in the higher wages. And so what we said is we have to be patient. We have to build an economy so that we have complete supply chains. Once that happens, it's going to be a lot easier to bring in the target industries. And so thankfully, council did see the value of this, and they also approved this adjustment. And again, what this does is allows us to qualify companies solely on the characteristic of being a supply chain company or a supply chain filler, and then start working on incentivizing them just on those grounds. And so this is really key. And we're really happy that we were able to get this done. That is the second adjustment. The third one is really something I'm sure we can all agree on, and that is just education. We need to educate our workforce. The stronger our human capital is in El Paso, the easier it's going to be for us to bring in all types of industries. And I know the folks at the EPJ, by EPJ, know this because a lot of what you do is really training us, training people, bringing in research and development. And that is really what this is meaning to do. We did sort of have a component of this in the policy, but it really wasn't emphasized. And so you'll remember that at the beginning of the presentation, I mentioned the training grants. Those aren't, say a formal part necessarily, but we knew we had to create these kind of grants. So we were always going above and beyond the policy to make sure we structure training programs that would then have these companies train El Pasoans, right? So that we create careers for people and not just temporary jobs. So what we did with this one is we wanted to formalize the inclusion of these skills training programs. And so what we're saying is we do want to incentivize companies to provide workforce skills training in coordination with educational institutions and the Workforce Solutions Boardplex. And that allows us then to tap into a high-powered organization, the Workforce Solutions Boardplex, that also all day basically works to train people who may need work, who are currently, say, unemployed, and lines them up so that the companies have a quick access to a qualified workforce as soon as they get in here. One of the worst things that can happen is that we can incentivize a company to come into town and then they have a hard time finding employees. And so we wanted to make sure that we essentially preset this so that we've got the employees that the companies would need from day one. Right. And so we tie them into the Workforce Solutions Boardplex, but then also, as I mentioned, have both of those institutions work to create training programs. And again, you train El Pasoans, they not only become individually more powerful, but then collectively our community becomes more attractive to companies that are looking to come into town. And so thankfully, this was also approved. And now we're able to expand our incentives if a company is working to commit to providing skills training for El Pasoans. And then the last portion of the amendments is what you see before you. And this is, you could say, is a formality. You always want to adjust your target geographies to make sure that, again, you account for modern sort of investments, adjusted conditions, or different sort of target areas, or different companies looking to target different areas. And that's what you see here. We've updated our target areas because we know that we have to always keep moving with what the conditions are. I should say, when you see these target areas, don't think that this is the only, say, these 5 areas in parts of town that we're incentivizing. This doesn't preclude a company from going anywhere in town, but what we're saying here is that if you are a company that can work to, say, qualify with all the previous things you saw, but then also can work to move into one of these target areas, then there are additional incentives on the table. And when I say additional incentives, that typically means expanded rebates, right? So instead of a 50% rebate on your incremental property taxes, that could go up to 75, 80, 90, or even 100% in certain cases. And so I'll briefly go over a lot of these, but obviously most relevant to this morning's presentation is the top right side map. But really quickly, Historic Mission Trail is really low-hanging fruit, to tell you the truth. It is a super historic area that has over 300 years of history, that is natural destination retail just waiting for the taking. And it's really a lot of people in town don't even know about the Historic Mission Trail, but in many ways that area was the start of Texas. A lot of the what is today Texas moved up from the south hit El Paso and then went east. And when it hit El Paso in the 1600s, it was places like the historic Mission Trail that were really the ground of that foundation. And so we want to go back and say that we want to reemphasize our history and inject jobs in that area, which is also a low-income area. So that became very important to us. The downtown plan area, for obvious reasons, is an area we want to make sure we emphasize, because we want to consider that, or we want to increase or keep the pace of growth there and be able to manage that. So, that's very important, and we made sure that we kept the downtown plan area. The airport footprint is also important because, obviously the COVID context, a lot of airports across the nation have taken a beating. And so what we want to do is reemphasize the importance of our airport footprint, bring more companies to the area, and then also bring, make sure that we can tie in, say, logistics companies to the airplanes and make sure that they are close to where they need to be. But then also the airport is really central to the city. So if you can emphasize growth there, you really put growth in the middle of the city that can easily be spilled over to different parts of town. The TERS 11, tax increment reinvestment zone number 11 in the Northeast, is the other target area we wanted to add. And that's sort of, we consider that to be a community spark plug for the Northeast. As you know, the Northeast hasn't sort of received as much development as maybe other parts of town have, but we want to reverse that. And so we targeted an area that the former home of the Cohen Stadium, and now we want to make sure we inject companies out there, because we truly believe that if we can do that right, bring in companies and jobs there, it really is going to trigger off a lot of development in the Northeast. But finally, as I mentioned, most relevant to this morning's presentation is the TERS number 6, the MCA area. So the MCA, as maybe most people are aware, is also covered by a tax increment reinvestment zone. And I'm not sure if the attendees fully understand what that is, but that's just a special district that you set up. And then what happens is, as you increase development there, the district serves to keep the majority of the new tax revenue, drops it back into that district to help fund infrastructure, to help fund developments, to help fund incentives. So that was really an important step. And the TERS 6 was expanded just a bit before our policy, purposely because we knew we needed to really put an emphasis on that. Obviously, as I mentioned, within the COVID context, there's a lot more emphasis on our medical capabilities, research, and production. And so we wanted to make sure that we emphasized and re-emphasized the importance of the MCA area to our community, right? And so what you see there on the top right side is that now the original TERS was expanded to pull in a lot more commercial. Previous to this, the TERS was really limited to institutional developments, and so that didn't really bring in a lot of tax value. So the district was expanded to then pull in more commercial, as I mentioned, and that's going to bring in a lot more tax revenue. And that works to not only help us incentivize companies, but then also to help provide funding for infrastructure development that would go eventually and support things like the MCA's master plan, right? So the idea is bring more money to the area, help redevelop that area, bring in these campuses, and then also bring more companies around. So that is really important to us. And so we did emphasize the value of the MCA area as a target area. So that now becomes one of the main focus points of the city. And again, those are the key adjustments, right? And so I'll just kind of remind you all what those were. We did shift the wage considerations to require that all proposed positions do exceed the local wages associated with each proposed position as per the BLS. And again, what's interesting about that is it closes a couple of gaps in our policy. And I failed to mention this before, but before we adjusted that, what we had in the policy was basically wording that said 80% of your jobs have to pay, the median county wage. That left us open. That 20% was a hole that we definitely needed to cover. We didn't want to get exploited to that 20%. And so what we said now is that 20% is gone. That 100% of your jobs, all of your jobs, have to pay more than what those jobs pay locally for us to consider you as a company that may receive incentives. But that's very important to us. Goal B, again, was targeting the supply chain and cluster strategy. And that, again, is if you are a company that can come to El Paso, and we've identified you all as a supply chain company, and especially a company that's filling in a missing portion of our supply chain, then that alone will qualify you for incentives, or at least to begin talks on incentives. Goal C, we need to target incentives for skills training for the reasons that are probably obvious to everyone on this call today. And then goal D was, again, to update our target areas. And those were the proposed amendments, and those were the amendments that were unanimously adopted by Council on January 19th. And so now to just finish off and tie it into what we're talking about today, the question is, how does this impact the medical device industry? Well, first of all, as I mentioned, this is very specifically, the Tier 6 became a high emphasis target area. So now what we do every time we meet with a company is we're telling them, locate within the Tier 6, and just complete transparency. It doesn't even necessarily for us have to be a company that's solely associated with medical. It can be anyone, because what we're trying to say is, company, go to that area, add more tax value. We can drop that back into the Tier 6 funding, and then now people like the MCA organizations or the companies like the MCA can help direct how that funding will be used. So that's very important to us now that we've really emphasized Tier 6, the MCA area, as a key target area for the city. That means more development at the MCA campus, more development in the areas right around. But that also ties up with another one of our incentive policies that I sort of only hinted at today. And that is it's two policies. Our strategy in terms of this policy that I mentioned again is to create jobs, target certain kinds of industries. We've got two other incentive policies that really mean to rebuild our city very specifically, right? And specifically in a manner that creates more walkability. And so when that works in concert with the strategic 381, because we know, it's one thing to train people, but the danger is, as we all know, some people get trained, they get educated. El Paso is really good at educating people, but unfortunately they leave. And so we have to work at not only bringing in the jobs and the training, the wages, but also creating El Paso as an attractive community that will retain these smart people, right? Quality of life and eventually quality of place. So what that second bullet point is doing is we've got a separate set of policies that will incentivize the creation of a walkable area proximate to the MCA. So the areas that you saw sort of at the edge of that previous map, this right here on the top right side, is what we want to now incentivize to become sort of higher density, first of all, mixed use, more walkable communities where people can basically get out of their cars and walk more, eventually relocate in that area. So that helps to, again, bolster not only the residential density, but then also if you're talking about bringing companies and researchers and people that work directly with the MCA, they can now have access to housing that's right down the street, right? So not only do we mean to bring in companies with the Tier 6 inclusion, but then we also mean to rebuild the surrounding area in a way that's attractive and more active than what we see today. Again, the third bullet point is that with the training and education emphasis, this opens up a whole new set of doors, because we know that the MCA area is heavy on research and development. Before, as I mentioned, unfortunately, we had to disqualify a lot of those kinds of jobs because they may not have brought in a whole lot of jobs, right? Now what we're able to say is, look, if that's what your thing is, if your main emphasis is training and education, then please come to us anyway, because now there is a new emphasis on that, and we can start incentivizing you. Because, as I mentioned, we see the value. We've seen the value for a while, but now we've actually integrated, formally in the policy, a component that will emphasize companies that are helping train and educate El Paso's workforce. There is also a STEM job bonus category that we've emphasized as well. And so we basically said in the policy, and by the way, this was heavily influenced by people like Emma Schwartz, who got our policy, broke it apart, and really guided us towards what is a superior policy, and even kind of cleaned up some of our language. So kind of embarrassing on our end, but she really helped us, and your whole organization helped us. But now there is a STEM job bonus category. So again, if you're a company that can bring in, STEM-related jobs, even if there aren't a whole lot of jobs, we will work to provide attractive incentives for you based solely on the fact that you are creating STEM jobs. So this is clearly targeted towards places like the MCA, and obviously, everything in the bio-EPJ sort of community. And then finally, supply chain approach, because we know that, obviously a lot of supply chains have been affected, with transportation being affected. maybe manufacturing in different countries not being able to keep up. And so what we want to do is be able to bring in more companies that will eventually serve to make the life of, say, the sort of higher tier jobs a lot easier in our community, and make them more numerous. So what we're saying here is that the supply chain approach will help bring, these are companies that may be just creating devices that may, again, before may not have qualified on the wage portion, but now they will be able to qualify. And so we know that these things coming together are things that will have a very specific, impactful effect on the medical device industry in El Paso. And really the next steps, and this is what I'll finish with, is what I started with, is it's really to identify recruits and help map the correct supply chains. And this is you all. We know, as I mentioned, as an organization, Economic Development in the City of El Paso, that we can become facilitators, right? We can work to lay the tools on the table that will help bring companies. But we don't do, say, medical manufacturing or health sciences 24/7, but you all do. And you all know way more than we know what exactly is needed within your industries to make these things actually beneficial. And so when we adopt policies, that is really step one. The job now starts. And so we now have to meet with our community in moments like this to get a clear sense of who the recruits are, how we can contact them, and what portions of our supply chain are maybe not as complete as they could be, and then how we can bring companies in. And so really, this is where you all are leaders. Again, we are here to help facilitate that, but we don't have any sort of illusions about our limited capacity to understand the details that you naturally understand, because again, you work with that every day. And so I really just want to thank you all again for the ability to present in front of you all, this morning, because what I'm hoping was transmitted today is just kind of the nature of our policy, the mechanics and how it functions, so that a lot of the people like yourselves, the big brains, understand what is possible, right? And so again, when you do identify companies or certain targets, you can come to us and we can use our tools to help support what you now have identified as key recruits and targets. And so again, I'm very thankful for the ability to be able to just talk about our policy this morning with you all. And really, that is the gist of our policy adjustments. And so I hope this did provide a lot of info for people maybe that they weren't aware of. And I guess at this point, Jackie, I'm good to take questions if anyone does have questions.
Sure. Thank you so much, Rafa, for that really thorough and wonderful presentation. I certainly learned a lot. We had one question in the chat box asking if we can make this presentation available to those who attended.
Absolutely.
I have a copy of the presentation I can email out with your permission.
Absolutely. And in fact, thank you for that question. And please distribute this as often as possible. Again, our understanding, we know, is the more people that know about this, the more brains that are involved, the more most eyes on the street. So definitely, I'll share this. Jackie, you have it. Please share it with everyone. And again, if anyone here is interested in learning more about the details of what we do, please reach out to us. And we're more than happy to set up individual meetings to kind of expand on anything that maybe I didn't expand on today.
Thank you. I know we're right a few minutes over the hour, and a few people had to drop off. For those of you who are able to stay for a few questions, feel free to do so, but understand if you have a hard stop. One of the questions I have, Rafa, if you don't mind, is you talk about the supply chain gap. So how will the city be qualifying companies who are shown to fill supply chain gaps? Like what do you need to see in order to make that policy available?
Perfect. Great question. Thank you, Jackie. So what needs to happen now, and this is kind of where I kind of, the very last bullet point, is we need to map our supply chain. And that's not easy to do. I know, thankfully, we're working with the Borderplex, which has started an excellent relationship with UTEP. But we kind of proactively jumped on that and identified, gosh, I think it's about over 1,000 companies that are part of the supply chain. And we've got certain software that may help us try to understand what companies those are. But really, that's what needs to happen. We need to, frankly, get a complete sense of what our supply chain map is in town. Because what happens is once we're able to identify, say, 3 or 4 key gaps, then we can understand what kind of companies can fill those gaps. And then we can call them, we can reach out to them, we can work with them to make sure that they come to El Paso, fill out those gaps. And so that is going to be key, Jackie, for everyone to really, again, you all know what you do. The industry you work in, it's miles above, your information is miles above what we've got. And so here is where we do need your help to understand what is missing in our community. What companies provide the services that we're missing. And then if you can and we're always researching, trying to understand, but if you can reach out to us and give us a clear sense of, hey, look, companies A, B, and C could really help fill up a gap here, then we will reach out to them and try to structure an incentive. And again, the idea with this portion is we no longer have to sort of prohibit them based on their wages or even the amounts of jobs that they're going to create now, solely as far as like them being categorized as a supply chain company. If we can categorize them as a supply chain company that's missing in town, that alone will qualify them. So I guess to a short answer would be that we do need to really map out the supply chain specific to each target industry, and that is going to be heavily influenced by the community leaders like yourselves.
Okay, great, thank you.
We
had a question in the chat. Somebody saying their company's in Vinton, Texas. Mm-hmm. Could they be considered for these incentives?
Absolutely, absolutely. And so, as I mentioned, the 380 is very specific to companies that are inside the city of El Paso. Obviously, Vinton is just out of the western portion of El Paso, but definitely, these, if somebody is interested in say expanding, right? So I think in terms of what your question is, I think what they were asking is, hey, look, we're already in Vinton. Can we get incentives to expand? And the answer is yes, not necessarily from the city of El Paso, because that is outside of our jurisdiction, but we quickly work to tie a company like that up with the county of El Paso, right? And so the 381 policy the county provides can definitely serve to expand the development out in Vinton. Especially if it means, say, adding more to the tax base. I know out in Vinton, there is a very unique taxing situation where a lot of the taxes aren't necessarily captured by the entity, the town of Vinton, but they are captured, at least the proportionate amount, by the county. And so, yes, there is an incentive possibility, although it is more specific to the county's 381 policy. But, I would welcome any companies that are outside of El Paso within the county to even reach out to us, and we can serve as technical assistance to tie you up with the county, and obviously with other state programs.
Great, that's good to hear. Thanks. Do we have any other questions from those of you still on the call?
I have one quick question, if it's okay.
Of course.
Of course, Lucy.
Rafa, one of the main things here in Juarez is that most of our developments are happening from companies and where they see themselves better positioned in regards to labor.
Yes.
How can we start something here that instead of promoting zones where labor is more available, how can we promote more, like you're saying, like a zone, like come to this zone? And would it be better to go directly with the developers and do that, or just start a program? And how could we start a program like that? And can I pick your brain when we have coffee?
Absolutely, I would say so. To answer your last question first, absolutely. Let's have some coffee. We can talk about the details. Here is my ignorance in terms of what is allowable within Mexico, right? I'm not exactly sure. For example, you can rebate, property taxes. I know the sort of tax collection in Mexico is a bit different from what is the U.S. Mm-hmm. So I couldn't be able to talk to you with true confidence about how that can be sort of a program can be established. But definitely what we recommend, and again, I'm not sure if there is a capacity to create special zones out there, but obviously I was saying, the advantage of Juarez is that the labor costs are low and it's a very good, strong workforce. I think what we could do in terms of kind of increasing the kind of companies that go to Juarez specifically is maybe start working with enhancing the sort of built environment of certain areas, right? I know that a lot of times companies, unfortunately, may hesitate to go Juarez because, obviously there may be some security issues. maybe the communities aren't where they necessarily will live. So we have the case that a lot of people work in, especially executives may work in Juarez but come over to live in El Paso. So what we can do is I do recommend setting up programs where you could actually help rebuild portions of Juarez, maybe specific areas that are close to the companies or where you'd like for them to locate in very much the same way as our TERSs work, right? Tax increment reinvestment zones, I was thinking. And maybe what you can do is then drop a lot of or a significant portion of what you're seeing as new revenue back within those zones, and then create housing, right? Create parks, because we know that's just a natural thing that employees and employers will ask about communities, quality of space and place. And so, I can't pretend to be able to score what it's on the labor. You all are leaders locally in bringing in companies, but I would say that maybe if we can address the sort of built environment via, say, policies like on our side what the redevelopment incentives work to do, I think it would really go a long way to help attract more companies to Juarez. Do you know? You might have asked you a question. I was seeing.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yes. Are you all able to create those kind of special districts in Juarez State to carve up in areas?
At the moment we haven't, and and we've always gone along with what we try to do here in Juarez is try to be facilitators, and we understand that companies, all these companies have their goals and everything, and we do have zoning, of course, of where the industry can be and all that, but the thing is, in the past, just Juarez grew at a rate which was really uncontrollable. That we attempted to do in the last 5 years to kind of like not have all the construction all the way out there, kind of have it a little bit more urban. So
absolutely,
that's what we tried to do.
Absolutely, Agustin. And in fact, that ties directly into what I just mentioned in terms of the incentive policies. El Paso had a similar problem in that there was a lot of sprawl happening, right?
Yep.
A lot of growth at the edges of the cities for a number of factors. A lot of it is that the property, per square foot costs are cheaper on the outskirts of the city. So the city was spreading and spreading, but the insides weren't fully as filled in as they could have been. So, there's empty spots within the city. And the intent then became with these policies to encourage the sort of redevelopment of the inner parts of the city, and incentivize that, make the difference, basically the delta difference, so that companies that were considering maybe building out in the city then were able, via the incentives that we supply, to actually have it make financial sense to move towards the inner parts of the city. So not only, one, do we fill up the spaces, but then two, the kind of design requirements that we plugged into those ensure that we're getting built in within the inner parts of the city where, higher density, more walkable communities. And again, Juarez is really leader here, because obviously Juarez is a very walkable area, especially the inner parts, the older parts of the city. So I would yes, exactly. The outer parts are very much like El Paso, it's sprawl, auto-based. But we do want to bring back the emphasis on walkable communities, on pedestrian sheds and things like that. So I would just say, Augustine, that sure, if we could have a cup of coffee, I'd love to be able to break down the policies we have and understand how maybe that could be applied over in Juarez as well.
Yeah, that sounds like a plan. Jackie's looking at us like, please.
I think I'd like to start wrapping this up, but we probably have time for one more question if somebody has. Okay. I have a question from Jose Gerardo. He's asking, can we publicly announce a supply chain map for the El Paso Juarez area to gauge the general need for economic incentives?
Yes. So I guess to understand the question, do they mean that if they have a supply chain map, if they could kind of throw it out in public? Is that?
I'm not sure.
Or are you saying just a request?
Jackie, can you all hear me?
Yes, we hear you.
Okay, thank you. Good morning, all. Rafael, we've been working for a couple of years with the bio. I'm also working with Workforce Solutions, the CIDE for the state of Chihuahua, some organisms in Juarez, to try to put a supply chain map to try to identify the gaps, as you stated in the presentation earlier, try to identify those gaps that need a little bit of push. I see that some of the economic incentive areas are very, very targeted, which we feel it's kind of an issue. I've had a few discussions that the whole of El Paso should be an economic incentive area. I mean, I'm in the 79901 zip code, and the average household income here would make you cry. Something like $10,000, which is very, very little. And I don't see it covered in any of these maps. And we're a federally nominated empowerment zone. So I think we need to do a little bit of onboarding with regards to this supply chain to try to understand really what the situation out there is, because we're kind of handpicking some of these areas that we would like to see some development. But yeah, hey, look at the surrounding areas to these areas that we are handpicking. I mean, there is a lot of potential out there. I can give you a quick example of our own enterprise where we upskill our labor force to do very, very specialized area. I'm talking that our labor force is making something like in the neighborhood of about $22 to $25 an hour.
Wow.
And this is really, you really see the difference in the quality of life of those individuals when you do this. Just walk out to the parking lot. Everybody's got a car that is less than 5 years. Things of that nature.
Absolutely. And I'm sorry, your first name again?
Jose Gerardo.
Jose.
Yeah.
Yes, Jose, thank you very much for that. And, truthfully, yes, sir. And that's exactly what we need is people like yourself, Jose, to tell us, hey, look, you've got target areas, but these are other companies that also may just the same be good to locate in areas outside. And so, as I mentioned, I hope that the message wasn't that these target areas are the only areas that we're incentivizing. And I know that's not what you're implying, but just know, Jose, if it is a company that we see that does have a value, say, here you see the downtown plan area, right? A lot of that is the 79901 that we specifically pulled all the way down to the border there to pull in some of those properties. But obviously what's missing is, say, the Segundo Barrio and all that area. And so if a company could come to us, say, via a developer or a person like yourself, and say, hey, look, I do want to bring in jobs, but it might not be within your target areas. If there is a value, like you said, if gosh, those companies can serve to increase the wages at the scale that you mentioned, then we just the same, we will look at them as if they are, for all intents and purposes, within a emphasis area, right? So just know that if it's a company and you're saying, look, this is a good company, but it might not want to be located within these little teal lines, that's fine. Come to us, and it could be the case that we can structure an incentive that is just as rich, even more rich in certain cases than what would have naturally happened within these emphasis zones. But I'm glad to hear you say that, Jose, because that's exactly the kind of info that we need. And if you all do have supply chain maps, I'd really love to be able to get a meeting going with you so that we can start understanding, because you're our leader. People like you are going to be our leaders to make sure that this goes from a theoretical policy into something that's actually something we can implement effectively.
Thanks, Rafa. Thank you, Jose, for the question.
Thank you, Rafa. Thank you, Jeff.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Jose is a leader, and he literally leads our supply chain task force within BioEPJ. So Rafa will be following up with you, and we have talked to other partners like CMAC and the Borderplex Alliance on this issue. So we'll be following up with you on what we're doing there. I just want to wrap up really quickly, if you all can bear with me. I have a couple of announcements, and thank you all for sticking around and participating in the Q&A. Rafa, thank you again. Please know that Bio El Paso Juarez is a committed partner, not only with the City of El Paso, but with all of our economic development partners in the region and across the border. We're committed to working on, sorry, Rafa, can you stop sharing your screen?
Yes, I'm right in that process. Sorry.
Yeah, that's okay. It's a little weird to see myself. But we're committed to working with our industry partners, whether it's expanding manufacturing operations here, identifying those gaps to bring in suppliers, or attracting more R&D and product development. We're committed to working with our economic development partners in any way we can. We have 2 upcoming events that are related to this issue that I hope you all can mark your calendars to attend. On Wednesday, March 17th, we're hosting an information session with the Texas Workforce Texas Workforce Commission, Workforce Solutions, Borderplex, and TMAC to talk about training and funding opportunities that are available through special COVID-19 funding buckets. So that's going to be at 2 o'clock on the 17th, and we hope that you can join us if you're interested in, if you're an El Paso business that's interested in more training opportunities and funding opportunities for your employees. And then on April 8th, we're really going to continue this conversation. We're excited to have the Borderplex Alliance join us for a presentation on their 2025 Ascend Plan, which is a strategic plan for the region for economic development. Natalie Littlefield, the VP of Strategy, will be presenting on that, and specifically how it relates to Bio El Paso Juarez and the medical device manufacturing industry. So please mark your calendars to join us for that. That's going to be Thursday, April 8th at 11:30 a.m. Really interesting presentation then. And of course, look out for your emails. I'll be sending you these updates and these events, and follow us on LinkedIn. We post all of our events there if you're interested. So again, Rafa, thank you so much for a great presentation and for taking time out of your schedule to join us, and for all of your work with us. I mean, you're always available when we need you. If you don't mind, I'll send out your contact information when I send out the presentation to the attendees.
Perfect. Yes, perfect. Thank you.
Awesome. So thank you everyone again for joining us, and we hope to see you at one of our future events. Take care.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.